Hi everyone, my name's Ryan H. Lewis, and today I want to talk about one of the most difficult or tricky problems in cloud software development, and that is where to put your passwords. Not your password to your email account or your bank or anything, but when you have an application, often it uses usernames and passwords to log into things like databases. And so where's the best place to put those? Not in your code. If you answered that, I'm very upset at you. Definitely not anywhere that's going to go into source control. Although I have done that a few times myself. But really, when you're in the cloud, where do you put it? And so that answer has kind of changed over the years, and it actually kind of depends on the cloud provider you're using. But specifically for AWS, where would you put it? Well, in the past, there was a couple ways. One thing you could do is you could put it into your CloudFormation, not the templates, but when you execute a CloudFormation template, you could pass it in as a parameter. You could set that parameter to be protected so you wouldn't be able to see it in the console. And then you would basically set that as maybe like an environment variable somewhere. That's not secure. Don't do that. I have done that in the past, but that's not the good way to do it. Then there's another service called Systems Manager, and Systems Manager has gone through a few changes in the past. It's actually quite good now. But with Systems Manager, they had a thing called Parameter Store, which was a secure place that you could store basically parameters, and you could get them out with the AWS CLI and also from your application. So this was a good place that you could store a username and a password, and you could retrieve them in your app as needed, but they weren't being stored on the EC2 instance. The reason you don't want it stored on the EC2 instance or like a Lambda as an environment variable is because if that were to be compromised somehow, then people like an intruder or a malicious attacker would be able to read the username and password for your database, and then it's just an easy step to get access to your database. So you don't want that. So this was a problem. There were some solutions, but they actually weren't that great. And so AWS actually provided a solution. They built something almost specifically for this called Secrets Manager. And Secrets Manager it was released a couple of years ago, I think, at a reInvent is when it was announced. And I've started using it, and it honestly solves the problem perfectly. Basically what Secrets Manager does a couple things, but one of the main things it does is it stores sensitive data, such as username and password, and allows you to retrieve it with the AWS SDK or the AWS CLI. So you can have your application running on an EC2 instance. You can use IAM permissions to define who can have access to the secret in Secrets Manager. And your application, you can build a policy so that it gives access to whatever role is working in your EC2 instances running on. And then when your application needs to get a username password for a database or for like a third-party service or something, it just reaches out to Secrets Manager, gives it the key of the value that it's looking for, and then Secrets Manager gives it the username and password or really whatever's stored in there. You can also store like keys, like access keys and things like that for third-party services, tokens, session tokens, things like that. And then your application can use it to do whatever it needed to do. So that's really cool, and it works. It's a very simple process. And it's really custom built just for that use case. It does do something else though, which is actually really interesting, and I haven't gotten to play with as much as I would like to. That is automatic rotation of username and password credentials for databases. So if you're hosting your database in RDS using one of its many database engines, Secrets Manager is pre-built to connect to that database in RDS and rotate the username and password as often as you want it to, which is really cool. You don't have to, you just set up the automated rotation and it does it for you. And so this means you may think, okay, well, if it rotates it, how's my application going to know username and password? And, that's kind of one of the, based on previous cloud development, or even before the cloud development, that's kind of something you had to deal with, is how does your application know that? But what's awesome is the key for that username password stays the same. So your application goes up and on Monday, it goes up and says, give me the username password. And it's like admin password. And then it uses that and connects to the database. Then it's rotated on Tuesday. Then Wednesday, it goes and asks the same thing. And it's admin 3, password 4, and then it connects to the database. Because your application never knows what the username and password is, except when it needs to know it. When the Secrets Manager rotates the username and password, it updates it in the database, it updates it in Secrets Manager, and then your application just gets the new thing every single time. So it's really cool. It's a very efficient process, and it's one of my favorite services because it's so targeted on a use case problem that I have pretty much always had when I've been developing in the cloud. With Secrets Manager, you can store usernames and passwords. You can store access keys, session tokens. You can really store anything. There's a plain text mode that you can just, I don't know, you could put a novel in. Well, probably not a novel. I'm pretty sure there's a character count limit, but you can put kind of anything in, which is really cool. But I'm going to show you that today. We're going to create a secret username and password, and then we're going to get it in code using the SDK, and then we're also going to get it using the CLI, and we're going to parse it. So there's going to be a couple things we're going to do today. So let's take a look. Here we are in the AWS console, and Secrets Manager is a service. So you can just go to Secrets Manager. I don't have any secrets in here yet, so let's store a new one. Actually, here's one thing. You'll notice it does tell you pricing. So it's not free. It's 40 cents per secret. And then, if you are having a ton of API calls, it charges you per 10,000 API calls. It's not that bad, honestly. I think it's actually pretty good. So let's store a new secret. So here's all the options. You can do credentials for an RDS, which will let you rotate them. You can do credentials for DocumentDB, which is a MongoDB compatible document database in AWS. You can do Redshift. You can do another database. I don't actually know what other database means. Well, I guess you can pick these engines and then you can connect. So that's cool. Other types of secrets is actually what I use the most, because a lot of times, if I'm doing something with Circle CI or some sort of third-party service, a lot of times that's when I need a username and password. A lot of times with these apps that I've used with that are using RDS, typically the username password is so baked in, and I'm coming so late to the game that converting over to Secrets Manager would be, it's never a priority. But anyways, I'm usually using it this way, and it works really good with this way. So let me show you what this looks like. So I'll say here, I'll make a username and we'll call it Ryan. So there's two ways to do this. You can do key value or you can do plain text. It's just JSON. You're going to be processing this as JSON on the other end almost always. So this is just a pretty way to build the plain text JSON. It's just the same thing. So we'll do password and we'll say, fancy password. I'm so elite. Cool. And then you name the secret. And so this is the key that you use when you're getting it out. So we'll say test user pass. You can give it some tags. This is probably a good place if you have an application that it's specifically associated with. A tag is a good way just to keep it organized. And then you can set up the resource permissions if you need to access it from different accounts, which is something that sometimes you may need to do, but we don't have to now. So here's where you set up automatic rotation with databases that it can connect to. This is where you would set that up. I don't know what it's doing with the arbitrary kind of key and value pairs. I don't know if rotation would really do anything. So it gives you some sample of code. That's so nice. Let's see what it looks like in JavaScript. Yep. All right, so then we'll store it. Oh, so, okay. Before I was messing around with this and I used the same thing. You have to schedule these for deletion. I'm going to change the name. I already had one that named. You have to schedule these for deletion. You can't just delete them outright. It really does that so you'll go in and you'll change your code. So we've got test user pass 2 in here. If you click on it, it doesn't give you the, it doesn't let you see the value here. You kind of have to go an extra step to retrieve the username password. The secret value is what it's called. And this is nice because if you're showing somebody this thing, they don't get to see it. You can also set up IAM permissions around this secret that can manage who can actually see it and do things with it. So let's look at some code. I've got code here with JavaScript, and it is pulling in the AWS SDK. Let me see if there's a good, yeah, that's the best. Citing my region, using the AWS Secrets Manager SDK object. I make a function here that takes the key and then it sets it as the secret ID. And then I use this Secrets Manager get secret value function to actually go and get the value and bring it back, passing in that params object. And then I've been using this all the time recently. The AWS SDK promise function, which means I can pass it into async await and do things nice here. Here it's just going to console log it, and then I put some fancy Node JavaScript stuff around here so it will I can pass it in as a argument in the console. So here I am in this exercise folder with Secrets Manager, and I can run my JavaScript file with node index.js, and then I'll pass in the secret ID. So this is one that I gave it, the secret name. And if I do this, hopefully it'll work. Yes, it worked. So here's what it gets back when you call get secret value. You get the ARN, which I don't need. You get the name, which I know. You can actually version these secrets, which is really nice. With this, I only need one version, which is why it's set at AWS current. And here's the secret string. So this is the value that you want to get out of here. Then you can, in JavaScript, you can JSON parse this, and you can get the values and actually do the thing you want to do, which is really cool. So that's one way that you can get the secret out of Secrets Manager in JavaScript with the AWS SDK. Then we also may want to get it in the console. This is something that, like a lot of times, if you're running AWS code build, you'll want to get the you'll want to use Secrets Manager. Maybe you're just running some cron jobs. You'd like to use Secrets Manager. This is how you would do that. So I've got a bunch of different things in here. I've got the getting the entire secret. So let me comment out this and I'll run this. Let's do. So if I run this, it's using the AWS CLI. It's running the Secrets Manager get secret value, and then it's passing in the secret ID here. So you'll see you basically get the same thing that you got in the AWS SDK. You get just a whole bunch of stuff you probably don't need when you really just want the value. And so you can add, I've got a little multi-part thing here. You can add the query secret string, and that will just get you the, let's see if I saved that. I didn't. That'll just get you the secret string property off of that JSON response. So here's, the part that we really want. And then if you want to remove the quotes from around that, you can use the output text. I don't need to show you that. But one of the things that I like the most is when you get that, it's just JSON, right? What's your application going to do with JSON? Probably nothing if it's coming in the command line like that. And so what I like to do is actually parse that JSON and get properties off of it. On Mac, an easy way to do that in the command line is using JQ, and you can use Homebrew to install it with brew install JQ. And basically what you do is you can run that, you can get that text output so it doesn't have the quotes around it, still a JSON structure. And then you can pipe that into JQ using this format, which I had to look up on the internet. And you can pass in the property you want to get off of that JSON object. And so here I run it and I get the username, then I run it and get password. There's probably a way to concat that so it's just one command. But let me show you what that looks like. If I run it again, you'll see I get my username and my password, plain text. If I needed to do anything with that at a later point, then I totally could, and I could use those in my command line utility. So those are the different ways to use Secrets Manager in AWS. It's going to be the best way for you to manage passwords when you're developing in the cloud. So definitely try it out and get comfortable with it. Make sure that you aren't making the mistake of creating your application and building out all of these username passwords, putting them in your code, putting them as environment variables. There's all sorts of ways that you could do crazy things. I've probably done 95% of those crazy things. So thanks so much for watching this video. If you liked it, consider giving it a like or subscribing to my channel for more. I'll see you next time.